Seren had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. In every version, Cardan had taken her hand. In every version, the Luna ring had slid onto her finger, warm from his palm, while the great hall erupted in cheers and the bonfire threw copper light across the faces of everyone she had ever known. In every version, she had belonged, but Cardan was not holding her hand. He was holding Vespera's. Seren stood 7 rows back in the great hall of the Ashgrove Pack, surrounded by 300 wolves who were clapping, stomping, howling their approval, and she watched the man she had loved since she was 15 years old slide the Luna ring onto another woman's finger. The silver caught the firelight. Vespera's smile was radiant and practiced. Cardan's jaw was set in that way it always was when he had made a decision and refused to feel anything about it. Seren could not breathe. The noise of the hall pressed against her skull. Someone jostled her elbow. A woman behind her was weeping with joy, actual joy, as if this moment were beautiful and not the precise surgical destruction of everything Seren had been promised. She did not scream. She did not cry. She did not shove her way to the front and demand an explanation, although her wolf clawed beneath her ribs so hard she tasted copper. She simply stood there, her face perfectly still, her hands clasped in front of her, and watched the future she had been building for 6 years burn to the ground in absolute silence. No one looked at her. That was the part that would haunt her later. Not the ring, not Vespera's triumphant little gasp, not Cardan's refusal to scan the crowd for the woman he had courted and promised the moon to for half a decade. It was that no one in 300 wolves thought to look at Seren and wonder if she was all right. She was invisible. She had always been invisible. She had simply been too stupid to notice. The ceremony ended. The crowd surged toward the front to congratulate the new Luna, and Seren let the tide of bodies carry her backward, toward the doors, toward the cold autumn air outside, toward anything that was not this room. She made it to the courtyard before her knees buckled. She caught herself against the stone lip of the fountain, palms flat on the frozen surface, and forced air into her lungs in ragged, shuddering gasps. The water in the basin had a thin crust of ice. Her reflection stared up at her, fractured and distorted. She barely recognized it. 6 years. 6 years of standing beside him at every gathering, every negotiation, every border dispute. 6 years of running his household while he played politics. 6 years of being told, not asked, told, that she would be his Luna, that the ring was hers, that their bond was inevitable. And he had not even warned her. She pressed her forehead to the stone and let the cold bite into her skin. Behind her, the great hall roared with celebration. Music started, drums and strings and stamping feet, and the sound crawled under her skin like something with teeth. A voice came from the shadows to her left. "You are going to freeze out here." Seren's head snapped up. A figure leaned against the far column of the courtyard, half swallowed by darkness. Tall, unnervingly still. The kind of stillness that belonged to predators, not people. She knew who he was before the torchlight found his face. Every wolf in Ashgrove knew. Torvain Morcrath, Alpha King of the Black Veil Dominion. The man the Northern Territories called the Dark Wolf. The man whose name mothers whispered to frightened children who would not sleep. He had arrived 3 days ago for the trade summit with a retinue of silent, stone-faced warriors, and the entire pack had been walking on glass ever since. He looked at her now with pale, winter-gray eyes that held no warmth and no pity, and Seren's wolf went absolutely still inside her chest. "I am fine," she said, because apparently she was still capable of lying even while her world collapsed. Torvain did not respond. He studied her face for a long, unblinking moment, then pushed off the column and walked toward the gate. He paused without turning around. "My caravan departs before dawn," he said. "The east gate." Then he was gone. swallowed by the dark as if it had simply opened and welcomed him home. Seren stared after him, her pulse hammering, the words settling into her mind like stones dropping into deep water. It was not an invitation. It was not a kindness. She did not know what it was. But at 4 a.m, with one bag over her shoulder and the taste of ashes still coating her tongue, Seren walked through the east gate of Ashgrove and climbed into the last carriage of the Black Veil convoy without saying a word to anyone. Torvain was already inside, reading a folded letter by the light of a single lantern. He glanced up briefly when she sat down across from him, then returned to the page as if her arrival had been inevitable. The carriage lurched forward. The gates groaned shut behind her. She did not look back. They rode in silence for nearly an hour before Seren's composure cracked enough to speak. "Why?" she asked. Torvain folded the letter and placed it inside his coat. "You will find out soon enough," he said, and the carriage carried her north, into the dark, toward a kingdom built on fear and a king whose reputation was soaked in blood. The Black Veil Dominion did not look the way Seren had imagined. She had expected scorched earth and iron gates, a fortress carved from hostility. The stories painted Torvain's territory as a wasteland, a place where sunlight arrived reluctantly and left early. What she found instead, after 2 days of travel through dense ancient forest, was a valley. It opened beneath them as the road crested the final ridge, and Seren's breath caught despite everything. The capital, Thornhaven, sat in a wide basin flanked by dark pine ridges, a sprawling web of stone buildings and thatched rooftops threaded with rivers that caught the pale morning sun. Wood smoke rose in thin columns. People moved through the streets below, tiny and distant, and from up here, the city looked almost gentle. Almost. The fortress at its center corrected that impression immediately. Black stone, sharp angles, built into the mountainside like it had been carved from the rock by something with claws. It dominated the valley the way Torvain dominated a room, by simply existing too forcefully to ignore. The carriage descended into the city, and Seren pressed her face to the window, watching the streets narrow around them. People stopped what they were doing when the convoy passed. They did not cheer. They did not wave. They lowered their eyes and waited, and the silence that followed the carriage was heavier than any crowd noise Seren had ever known. They fear him, she thought. They genuinely fear him. The carriage stopped in the fortress courtyard. Torvain stepped out first and was immediately flanked by 2 guards who moved with the fluid, rehearsed precision of men who had been doing this for years. He spoke to someone Seren could not see, his voice low and clipped, and then he was gone, walking through a heavy oak doorway without a backward glance. She was left standing beside the carriage with her single bag, feeling spectacularly foolish. A man appeared from behind the second carriage. He was compact, dark-haired, with watchful brown eyes and a calm demeanor that reminded Seren of still water concealing a strong current. He stopped in front of her and inclined his head. "You must be the woman from Ashgrove," he said. "I am Jorel, the king's second." "Seren," she managed. Jorel studied her for a moment, and something in his expression shifted, just slightly, as though he were recalculating something. "The king has arranged quarters for you in the East Wing," he said. "You will have meals delivered until further notice. I would recommend you rest. You look like you have not slept in days." "I have not," Seren admitted. Something almost like sympathy crossed Jorel's face, but it vanished before she could be certain. He led her through the fortress in silence. The corridors were wide, cold, and dimly lit by iron sconces that threw long shadows across the stone floor. Seren counted doorways and turns out of habit, mapping her route back, because she had just followed a man called the Dark Wolf into his stronghold, and she was not entirely convinced she had not made the worst decision of her life. Her room was small but clean, a narrow bed, a wash basin, a window overlooking the inner courtyard. Jorel lingered in the doorway. "You should know something," he said, his voice carefully measured. The king does not bring people here. In the 8 years I have served him, he has never once invited an outsider into this fortress. Seren frowned. Then why did he bring me? Jarell's mouth tightened, and for a moment he looked like a man weighing whether to say something he should not. The king has not been well, he said. For some time now. We have exhausted every option available to us. He paused. And then he met you. Before Seren could respond, he pulled the door shut behind him. She stood alone in the small room, her bag still hanging from her shoulder, and felt the first cold thread of unease weave itself through her chest. She had come here to escape, to outrun the humiliation of Carden and Vespra and that terrible hall full of wolves who had forgotten she existed. But Torvain had not brought her here out of charity. He had brought her here because he needed something, and she had absolutely no idea what it was. That night, Seren woke to a sound she could not name. It came from somewhere deep in the fortress, low and sustained, vibrating through the stone walls and into the frame of her bed. It was not a howl. It was not a scream. It lived somewhere between the two, something that made her wolf flatten against her ribs and whimper. The sound lasted nearly a minute, then stopped as abruptly as it had started. Silence rushed in to fill the void, and Seren lay rigid beneath the covers, staring at the ceiling, her heart slamming against her sternum. Sleep did not return. In the morning, no one mentioned the sound. Seren watched the servants moving through the corridors, their faces composed, their routines undisturbed, and wondered if she had imagined it. But the dark circles under their eyes told a different story. They had heard it, too. They had simply learned not to react. Jorel found her in the corridor outside her room, already dressed, already restless. "You look terrible," he observed. "Charming," Seren replied. His mouth twitched, the barest suggestion of amusement before he composed himself. "Walk with me," he said. He led her through a wing of the fortress she had not seen, past a library with vaulted ceilings, through a narrow passage that smelled of wood smoke and dried herbs, and into a long stone gallery overlooking the training grounds below. Warriors moved through drills in the gray morning light, their breath fogging in the cold air. "What do you know about the king's reputation?" Jarell asked without preamble. Seren considered lying, then decided against it. "That he is brutal. That he destroyed 3 rival packs during the Northern Consolidation and left no survivors. That people who cross him tend to disappear." "And you came here anyway," Jarell said. "I did not have anywhere else to go." Jarell turned from the window to face her. The king ended those wars to stop a decade of border slaughter that was killing hundreds of civilians a year. The packs he dismantled were raiders, slavers, wolves, who burned villages and sold children. He paused. "The stories you have heard are not wrong, but they are not complete." Seren absorbed this quietly. "You said he has not been well," she prompted. Jarell's jaw tightened. He led her further down the gallery, stopping before a window that overlooked not the training grounds but a small interior courtyard. Torvain was there, alone, seated on a stone bench with his back against the wall. His eyes were closed. His head was tipped back. He looked like a man who had not slept in a year. "Last night," Seren said slowly. "That sound." "Every night," Jarell confirmed quietly. "For over a year now. 14 months to be exact." The words settled over Seren like cold water. Every night. She stared down at the king in the courtyard, at the bruised hollows beneath his eyes, the way his hands lay open and slack on his knees as if he had simply run out of the strength to clench them. "What do you want from me?" she asked. Jarell reached into his coat and produced a small folded cloth. He opened it carefully, revealing a sprig of dried lavender and a cutting of moonveil, a silvery herb Seren recognized from her years helping Ashgrove's healers. She had carried cuttings of it constantly, tucked into her pockets, woven into her braids. Its scent clung to her skin, her hair, her clothes. It had for years. The night of the Ashgrove ceremony, Jarell said, the king was standing in the courtyard with you for less than 5 minutes. He returned to his quarters afterward and slept for 3 uninterrupted hours. He met her eyes. He has not slept for more than a few minutes at a time in over a year. 3 hours, Seren. Do you understand what that means? Seren's stomach dropped. That was not me, she said. That was coincidence. Perhaps, Jarell said, which is why I would like to test it. He gestured down toward the courtyard. Sit with him. That is all I am asking. Sit near him and let me observe. Seren's pulse quickened. She looked down at Torvain again, at the exhaustion carved into every line of his body, and felt something twist uncomfortably in her chest. Not attraction, not sympathy. Something closer to recognition. She knew what it felt like to be hollowed out from the inside while the world expected you to stand upright. Fine, she said. But if he kills me, I am haunting you personally. Noted, Jarell replied without smiling. The courtyard was colder than it looked from above. Seren crossed the flagstones toward the bench, acutely aware of every sound her footsteps made. Torvain's eyes opened as she approached. Those pale gray eyes, sharp and assessing even through the exhaustion, tracked her with the focus of a predator cataloging a potential threat. The herbalist from Ashgrove, he said. Not a question. Seren, she corrected. I do have a name. Something shifted in his expression. Not softness, not warmth. More like the faintest crack in a wall. Sit, he said. Not an invitation, a command. She sat on the far end of the bench, leaving as much space between them as the stone allowed. The silence stretched. Seren folded her hands in her lap and stared straight ahead at the moss growing between the courtyard stones. Minutes passed. 5, then 10. The cold crept through her coat. She was about to say something, anything, just to break the tension, when she heard it. His breathing had changed, slow, deep, even. Seren turned her head carefully and looked at him. Torvain's eyes were closed. His head had tipped slightly to one side, his chin dipping toward his chest. The rigid set of his shoulders had loosened. The tight line of his jaw had gone slack. The most feared alpha king on the continent had fallen asleep on a stone bench in a freezing courtyard, 3 feet away from a woman he had met 2 days ago. Seren held completely still, barely breathing, and stared at him. Above them, in the gallery window, Jarell leaned forward and pressed his hand flat against the glass. 20 minutes later, a servant dropped a bucket somewhere inside the fortress. The clang echoed through the courtyard like a bell. Torvain's eyes snapped open. He was on his feet in an instant, his hand reaching for a weapon that was not there, his body coiled and ready. His gaze swept the courtyard, found Seren still frozen on the bench, and locked onto her. For one terrible second she saw something behind his eyes that was not human. Something vast and ancient and barely contained. Then it was gone. His hand lowered, his breathing steadied. He looked at her for a long, unreadable moment. "What did you do?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Nothing," Seren said honestly. "I just sat here." Torvain stared at her. Then he turned and walked out of the courtyard without another word. Seren sat on the bench, her heart pounding, the cold seeping into her bones, and realized with perfect, terrifying clarity that she was not going home anytime soon. The summons came that evening. A guard appeared at Seren's door with an expression that suggested he had drawn the short straw and deeply resented it. "The king requests your presence in the West Tower," he said, immediately. Seren followed him through corridors that grew narrower and colder as they climbed. The West Tower was the oldest part of the fortress, built into the mountain itself, and the walls here were rough-hewn stone that glistened faintly with moisture. The air smelled of iron and pine resin and something older, something that had seeped into the rock over centuries. The guard stopped at a heavy door reinforced with black iron bands and knocked once. "Enter," came Torvain's voice from inside. The room was not what she expected. It was large but sparse, furnished with the bare essentials of a man who did not care about comfort. A desk buried in correspondence, a weapons rack against the far wall, a fireplace large enough to stand in, unlit, and the bed, wide and severe, its frame carved from dark wood, the sheets pulled tight with military precision. Torvain stood beside the desk with his arms crossed, Jarrell at his shoulder. Both men watched her enter with the studied calm of people who had already discussed her at length. "Close the door," Torvain said. Seren closed it, her pulse climbing. "My second tells me you are the reason I slept 3 hours in Ashgrove and another 20 minutes this afternoon," Torvain said. "Ki." His tone was flat, clinical, stripped of anything resembling emotion. "I have consulted the healers. They believe your natural scent carries a sedative compound that interacts with certain physiological responses in my system." Seren blinked. He made it sound like a chemical equation. "The proposed solution," Torvain continued, "is proximity during the night hours. You would sleep here." The word here landed in the room like a dropped blade. Seren's gaze cut involuntarily to the bed, then back to Torvain, then to Jarrell, who was studying the ceiling with sudden, intense fascination. "Sleep here," Seren repeated. "A cot will be arranged," Torvain said, "against the far wall. You will have privacy screens if you require them. This is a medical arrangement, nothing more." "Right," Seren said, nodding too quickly. "Of course. Medical." But her face was burning, and her thoughts had sprinted several miles ahead of the conversation into territory she absolutely refused to acknowledge. Because he was standing there with his sleeves rolled to his forearms, and the muscle and sinew beneath his skin shifted every time he moved, and she was now expected to sleep 10 feet from that. "I want to be clear," Torvain said, and something in his voice hardened. "I am not Carden." The name hit her like a slap. Not because of anger, but because of the precision of it. He knew. Of course he knew. He had been there. He had watched Carden give her ring away, and then found her hyperventilating in the courtyard. "I know," Seren said quietly. "This arrangement exists for one reason," he continued. "If at any point you are uncomfortable, you tell Jorel and it ends. No consequences. No retaliation. Is that understood?" She nodded. "Say it," he said. "I understand," Seren said. Something in his posture eased, barely perceptible, as if her confirmation had released a tension he had been holding. Jarrell excused himself with a nod and closed the door behind him. The room felt immediately smaller. Seren stood in the center of it, painfully aware that she was now alone with the dark wolf in his private chambers, at night, and was expected to somehow fall asleep. "The screen is there," Torvain said, gesturing to a folded linen partition leaning against the wall. "The cot is behind it." Seren busied herself setting up the screen with hands that shook only slightly. She could feel his gaze on her back, steady and unreadable, and forced herself not to turn around. When she finally lay down on the narrow cot, the linen screen between them felt as substantial as smoke. She stared at the stone ceiling and listened to the king of the Black Veil Dominion try to fall asleep. She could hear him shifting, the creak of the bed frame under his weight, the controlled rhythm of his breathing that was too deliberate to be natural. He was forcing himself to relax, and it was not working. She thought about how strange her life had become. A week ago, she had been arranging wildflowers for what she thought was her own Luna ceremony. Now she was sleeping in a warlord's bedroom because her body chemistry apparently functioned as a tranquilizer. The absurdity of it nearly made her laugh. She pressed her hand over her mouth to smother it. From across the room, Torvain's breathing changed. It deepened. slowed. The restless shifting stopped. Seren held still, listening, and after 10 minutes, she was certain. He was asleep. She lay there in the dark, the fire unlit, the room cold, and felt an odd, complicated ache settle beneath her ribs. Not for Carden. Not anymore. For the man on the other side of the room whose body had finally surrendered to exhaustion because she happened to be nearby. She fell asleep without meaning to, and woke to gray dawn light and an empty room. The bed was already made. A cup of tea sat on the small table beside her cot, still warm. She stared at it for a long time. The days took on a shape. Mornings belonged to the healers. Seren had offered her skills within hours of the arrangement being formalized, partly because she needed something to do with her hands, and partly because sitting idle in a fortress full of strangers made her want to crawl out of her own skin. The head healer, a sharp-boned woman named Marin with silver-streaked hair and an expression that suggested she had seen everything twice and been impressed by none of it, accepted Seren's help with a single raised eyebrow and a grunt that apparently constituted a warm welcome. Afternoons she spent in the herb stores, grinding, sorting, cataloging. Marin's supplies were extensive but disorganized, and Seren threw herself into the work with a focus that bordered on obsessive. It was easier than thinking. Evenings belonged to the tower. She arrived after the fortress settled, set up her things on the cot, and tried to make herself small and quiet while Torvain worked at his desk. He wrote letters. He reviewed supply reports. He stood at the window and stared into the dark valley below for stretches so long that Seren wondered if he had forgotten she was there. He never spoke to her during these hours. Not at first. So Seren, who had never been comfortable with silence and lacked the self-discipline to learn, started talking. She did not talk to him, exactly. She talked near him, the way one might talk near a large, unpredictable animal that you did not want to startle, but also could not bear to sit beside in complete silence. She told him about the time she accidentally set fire to the Ash Grove healer's pantry while trying to distill eucalyptus oil. She told him about the apprentice who had confused Foxglove with Comfrey and nearly poisoned the pack's entire elder council. She told him about the she-wolf who came to the infirmary every week, convinced she was dying of a different ailment, and left every week furious when told she was perfectly healthy. Torvain never responded, never laughed, never acknowledged her rambling, never even looked up from his correspondence. But he fell asleep faster on the nights she talked. Seren noticed. She filed the information away and kept talking. Then the small things began. The tea appeared every morning without explanation. Then a second blanket materialized on the cot, thicker than the first, the kind of heavy woven wool that cost more than Seren earned in a month. Then the fireplace, which had never been lit, began crackling with warmth by the time she arrived each evening. "Thank you for the blanket," she said one evening as she unpinned her hair. "What blanket?" Torvain said without looking up. Seren smiled at the wall and did not press it. A week in, she returned from the healer's stores to find a proper pillow on her cot. Goose down, encased in linen so soft it felt like a whisper. "And the pillow?" she asked that evening, unable to resist. "The quartermaster handles bedding allocations," Torvain said, turning a page. "I would not know." "Of course," Seren said. "The quartermaster." His ears went faintly red above the collar of his shirt, and Seren bit the inside of her cheek so hard she nearly drew blood. 3 weeks in, something shifted between them. Seren was mid-sentence, recounting a spectacularly failed attempt to teach a litter of pups basic wound care that had ended with 3 bandaged fingers, all hers, when Torvain made a sound. It was quiet, almost involuntary. A single exhale through his nose that might, if she were feeling generous, be classified as a laugh. Seren stopped talking and stared at him. He was looking at his letter, but the corner of his mouth had moved. Just barely. Just enough. "Did you just laugh?" she asked. No, he said. You did. I heard it. You are mistaken. Your mouth moved. I was reading something amusing in this supply requisition. Siren grinned at him, wide and unguarded, and Torvain looked up from the letter. Their eyes met, and for one unprotected moment, his expression cracked open into something almost human, almost warm. Then he looked away, cleared his throat, and returned to his correspondence with renewed intensity. Siren lay down on her cot that night with something glowing quietly in her chest that she refused to examine too closely. She fell asleep easily, lulled by his steady breathing. And then she was somewhere else. Cold hit her first. Not winter cold. Not the clean bite of mountain air. This was the cold of deep earth, of places sunlight had never reached. Siren stood in a forest of black pines, their branches locked overhead like a cage. The ground beneath her bare feet was frozen and hard, and the silence was so complete it had a texture, thick, suffocating, pressing against her eardrums. She could see her breath. She could see nothing else. Then she heard it. The sound from her first night in the fortress. That terrible noise caught between a howl and a scream, rising from somewhere ahead of her in the dark. And beneath it, barely audible, a voice she recognized. Torvain. Siren lunged forward, crashing through the undergrowth, and found him in a clearing ringed by frozen trees. He was on the ground, his hands pressed flat against the ice, his head bowed, and around him, circling slowly with the patience of predators who knew their prey could not escape, were shadows. They had shapes. Almost wolf, almost human, flickering between the two like a flame that could not decide what it wanted to burn. Their eyes reflected nothing. They made no sound. "Torvain," Siren called out. Her voice did not reach him. The shadows closed in tighter. She reached for his shoulder, her fingers closing around the fabric of his shirt, and the moment she made contact, the clearing shattered like glass. Siren gasped awake in the tower room, her hand outstretched, her heart slamming against her ribs. Torvain was still asleep in his bed, his breathing deep and even, his face slack with the peace of genuine rest. Whatever she had seen, wherever she had been, he was not there anymore. But her hand was trembling, and the cold from that place still clung to her skin like a stain. She pulled the blanket, his blanket, up to her chin and stared at the ceiling until dawn. She did not tell him. She did not tell anyone. It happened again 4 nights later. The same dark trees, the same suffocating cold, the same shadows circling in the clearing. This time, Siren reached him faster, pulled him out sooner, and woke gasping with frost still burning on her fingertips. Torvani slept through it, peaceful and unaware, and she lay shaking on her cot and told herself it was a dream. She almost believed it. Marin cornered her in the herb stores on a Tuesday morning. "Sit down," the healer said, pulling out a stool. Siren sat, mostly because Marin's tone did not leave room for alternatives. "The king's sleep patterns have improved dramatically since your arrangement began," Marin said, consulting a leather-bound journal filled with her own cramped handwriting. "He is averaging 6 hours per night. Before you arrived, he was managing 40 minutes on a good night." Siren blinked. 40 minutes? "His system was shutting down," Marin said bluntly. "Another 3 months and his organs would have started failing. Alpha constitution or not, the body has limits." The casual brutality of the statement hit Siren harder than she expected. "However," Marin continued, "the improvement plateaus when physical proximity remains at the current distance. Your cot is approximately 9 feet from his bed." She looked up from the journal. "The data suggests that reducing that distance would deepen and stabilize his sleep significantly." Siren saw where this was going and felt her stomach flip. "You want me to sleep closer to him?" she said. "I want you to sleep beside him," Marin corrected. "Same bed. Direct contact would be ideal, but I will settle for same bed as a starting point." Siren opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Does he know about this recommendation? He rejected it outright, Marin said, called it unnecessary and inappropriate. Then he went 2 nights without sleeping at all, and Jarell found him collapsed at his desk yesterday morning. Siren's chest tightened. He will not ask you, Marin added. He would rather destroy himself than impose on you further. The words landed with uncomfortable precision because Siren already knew they were true. She had watched him for weeks now, watched the way he held himself apart from everything, the way he gave orders instead of making requests, the way he added comforts to her cot without acknowledging them, because receiving gratitude was something he did not know how to do. He was a man who believed he did not deserve kindness, so he made sure never to be in a position to receive it. Fine, Siren said. I will tell him myself. The conversation that evening was excruciating. No, Torvain said before she had finished her second sentence. Marin says your sleep is plateauing. Marin oversteps. Marin says you collapsed at your desk. A muscle in his jaw twitched. I did not collapse. I rested my eyes. On the floor? He glared at her. She glared back. The fire crackled between them. This arrangement was meant to be temporary, he said stiffly. Sharing a bed is not temporary. It is intimate. It is medical, Siren countered, throwing his own word back at him. Something flickered in his expression, and for one unguarded second she saw it. Not resistance. Fear. He was afraid. Not of her, not of the closeness, but of something the closeness might reveal. One night, Siren said, softening her voice. Just try it. If it does not work, we go back to the cot. He held her gaze for a long, charged moment. Then he exhaled through his nose and turned toward the window. One night, he agreed, his voice rough. The logistics were agonizing. Siren stood on one side of the bed while Torvain stood on the other, and they regarded each other across the mattress like two generals studying a battlefield. I sleep on the left, he said. That is fine. I may shift in my sleep. That is also fine. A pause. I am told I generate considerable heat, he added, looking profoundly uncomfortable. I run cold, Siren offered. So that works out. Another pause, long enough to build a house in. They got into bed. Siren lay on her back, rigid, her arms straight at her sides, and stared at the ceiling. She could feel him beside her, the dip of the mattress under his weight, the warmth radiating from his body across the gap between them. Every nerve in her body was alive. You are very stiff, he observed into the dark. I am trying not to touch you accidentally. I appreciate the consideration. You are welcome. Silence. The fire popped and settled. Siren could hear his breathing, could count the seconds between each inhale, could smell him. Pine and iron and something beneath that, warm and dark and faintly sweet, that made her wolf press forward beneath her ribs with a longing so sharp it stole her breath. She clenched her fists at her sides and willed her body to behave. 20 minutes passed. His breathing changed, deepened. His body relaxed, the rigid tension melting out of him by degrees until he was genuinely, profoundly asleep. Siren exhaled slowly and let her own muscles unclench. This was fine. This was manageable. This was purely medical. Then he rolled toward her. It was unconscious, a sleeping body following warmth and scent, and his arm came to rest across her waist with a weight that pinned her gently to the mattress. His face pressed into her hair. His breath warmed the back of her neck, and Siren's entire body went incandescent. She held absolutely still. His arm tightened, drawing her closer, and a low rumble moved through his chest, a sound caught halfway between a growl and a sigh of relief, as if his body had been searching for this specific configuration and had finally found it. Siren's wolf surged. The pull she had been trying to ignore for weeks roared to life, a deep magnetic ache that started in her chest and radiated outward until every inch of her skin burned with the need to press closer. Closer still. Closer, until there was nothing between them at all. She knew what this was. Every wolf knew what this was. The recognition. The pull. The bone-deep certainty that the person beside you was not just anyone, that they were yours in a way that transcended choice, transcended logic, transcended the fact that you had known them for less than a month and had originally come here because you had nowhere else to go. But Seren had been invisible her entire life. She had been left by her parents, overlooked by her pack, discarded by the man who was supposed to choose her. People like her did not get fated bonds. People like her did not get chosen by kings. So she lay there in the dark, wrapped in the arms of the most feared alpha on the continent, and told herself it was nothing. It was proximity. It was loneliness. It was the rebound of a shattered heart looking for somewhere to land. It was not real. But her wolf knew better. And somewhere beneath the denial, somewhere she was not yet brave enough to look, so did Seren. She did not sleep that night. Not even for a moment. And in the morning, when Torvain woke and found her in his arms, his body went rigid against her back. She felt the exact second he became aware of the position, felt his breath hitch, felt his arm tighten involuntarily before he forced himself to let go. He pulled away and stood in one sharp motion, crossing the room to the window. The cot arrangement was sufficient, he said, his voice strained. We will return to it. Seren sat up slowly, her heart hammering. It worked, though, she said. Did you sleep? He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer at all. Better than I have in over a year, he finally admitted, and his voice splintered on the last word. Then he left the room before she could respond, and Seren sat alone in his bed, surrounded by his scent, and felt the pull in her chest tighten like a fist. It happened again 3 nights later. Seren had returned to the cot at Torvain's insistence, the 9 feet of distance restored between them like a barricade. He had not explained why. He had not needed to. The morning after they shared the bed, something had shifted in the air between them, a charge that neither of them acknowledged and neither could ignore. The cot was safer. The distance was necessary, but the cursed place did not care about distance. Seren woke inside it without warning, one moment asleep on her cot, the next standing barefoot on black ice beneath a sky that held no stars. The cold was worse this time, sharper, burrowing into her bones as if it intended to stay. The pines towered overhead, their branches creaking in a wind she could not feel. She found Torvain faster than before. He was further in, kneeling at the edge of a frozen lake so dark it looked like a wound in the earth. The shadow figures circled closer than she had ever seen them, their flickering forms pressing inward with slow, patient hunger. One of them turned toward her. Seren's blood went cold. In her previous visits, the shadows had never acknowledged her. She had passed through this place like a ghost, unseen, irrelevant. But this time the shadow's empty gaze found her and held, and she felt its attention like a hand closing around her throat. She grabbed Torvain's arm and pulled. The forest shattered. She woke gasping, her fingers twisted in her blanket, sweat cooling on her skin. Across the room, Torvain was already sitting upright in bed. He was staring at her, and in the dying firelight his face was ashen. "You were there," he said. Not a question. Seren could not lie. Yes. "How long has this been happening?" She hesitated 1 second too long. "How long?" The words came out as a snarl that rattled the window glass. "Twice before tonight," she admitted. "The first was weeks ago." Torvain was out of bed and across the room before she could draw another breath. He stood over her cot, his fists clenched, his chest heaving, and looked at her with an expression that was equal parts fury and horror. "They saw you," he said, His voice scraped raw. "Tonight they saw you. Do you understand what that means?" "No," Seren said honestly. "It means the curse knows you are there. It means it can reach you now." His hands were shaking. She could see them trembling at his sides, and the sight was somehow more frightening than anything she had witnessed in that terrible place. "If you stay near me, it will pull you in deeper. It will trap you the way it has trapped me, and I will not allow that. Torvain, this arrangement is over." His voice broke on the last word, and he turned away from her, pressing his palms flat against the stone wall. "Jorel will arrange quarters for you in the East Wing. You will not come to this room again. You cannot just decide this without me. I am your king," he said to the wall. "I can decide whatever I wish." The cruelty of it was precise and deliberate, and Seren recognized it immediately for what it was. A weapon aimed at himself, disguised as an order. He was not sending her away because he wanted her gone. He was sending her away because he wanted her there so badly that the wanting itself had become dangerous. She stood from the cot, pulled on her robe, and walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the iron latch. "You are going to kill yourself doing this alone," she said, without turning around. He gave no answer. Seren opened the door and left, and the sound of it closing behind her was the loneliest thing she had ever heard. The East Wing quarters were comfortable, warm, well-appointed. Serene hated every inch of them. She threw herself into work at the healer's stores with a ferocity that made Marin raise both eyebrows instead of one. She ground herbs until her palms blistered. She reorganized the entire tincture cabinet by potency, then by alphabetical order, then by color, because if she stopped moving, she would have to feel what was happening inside her chest, and she was not ready for that. The pull started on the second day. A low, constant ache beneath her sternum, as if something vital had been removed, and her body was searching for it. By the third day, the ache had teeth. By the fourth, it had claws. She stopped eating. Not deliberately. Food simply lost its appeal, its taste, its purpose. She would sit in front of a plate and stare at it until the meal went cold, then push it away untouched. Marin noticed. Marin noticed everything. "You need to eat," the healer said on the fifth morning, setting a bowl of broth in front of Seren with a pointed look. "I am not hungry." "I was not asking about your hunger. I was giving you an instruction." Seren picked up the spoon. Her hand trembled so violently that the broth sloshed over the rim. Marin sat down across from her, her expression shifting from stern to something dangerously close to gentle. "How bad is it?" she asked quietly. "I am fine." "Child, your hands are shaking. You have not slept in 4 days, and you have lost weight you did not have to spare. Do not insult my intelligence by telling me you are fine." Seren set the spoon down and pressed her palms flat against the table. "It feels like something is pulling my ribs apart," she admitted. "Slowly, all the time, and it gets worse every hour." Marin was quiet for a long moment. "Have you considered that what you are experiencing is not illness?" "It is not illness," Seren agreed. "It is something much worse." She caught glimpses of him over those days, a tall silhouette crossing the far end of a corridor, his voice echoing from behind a closed council door. Once, she turned a corner and nearly walked into him, and for one staggering second, the pull in her chest surged so violently she thought her knees would give out. His eyes found hers, gray and hollow and stripped of every defense, and she saw it written across his face as clearly as if he had spoken the words aloud. The same devastation. The same raw, desperate hunger barely leashed behind his composure. Then he looked away and walked past her as if she were a stranger. On the 6th day, Jorel found her in the herb stores. He looked grim. "The king has not slept since you left his chambers," he said without preamble. "He refuses to acknowledge it. He is conducting business as if nothing has changed, but I have known him since we were boys, and I have never seen him like this." "Like what?" Seren asked, though she already knew. "Like a man preparing for the end of something." The words hit her chest like a fist. On the 7th day, Seren collapsed. She was carrying a crate of dried valerian from the stores to the infirmary, a simple task she had performed dozens of times. But the corridor seemed to stretch and warp around her, the walls bowing inward, the light dimming at the edges. She heard the crate hit the stone floor, heard glass shatter, felt her legs simply stop working, as if the strings holding her upright had been cut simultaneously. She was falling, and then she was not. Arms caught her before she hit the ground. Strong arms that pulled her against a chest she recognized by scent alone, pine and iron and that warm, dark sweetness that lived beneath everything else. She heard a sound, low and anguished and barely human, and realized it was her name. Seren. His voice shattered something inside her, because he said it like a prayer, like a confession, like the last word a man says before he goes under. She tried to open her eyes. The world swam. She felt him lift her, felt the corridor moving around them, felt the frantic urgency in the way he held her, too tight, too close, as if letting go would end something he could not survive. She heard Marin's voice, sharp and commanding. Heard Jarell somewhere behind them. Heard Torvain snarl at someone who tried to take her from his arms, a sound so territorial and savage that the entire corridor went silent. When she woke, she was in the infirmary. Late afternoon light fell through the windows in long amber slats. Torvain sat beside her bed, elbows on his knees, his head in his hands. He had not changed his clothes. He had not left. Seren stirred, and his head snapped up. The look on his face undid her completely. Relief so vast it redrew every line of his features. Terror so deep it still lingered behind his eyes. And beneath it all, a tenderness so raw and unguarded that it could not possibly have been meant for her to see. "You are awake," he said, and his voice fractured down the middle. Seren looked at him, at the dark shadows carved beneath his eyes, at the rigid set of his jaw, at the way his hands gripped each other in his lap, as if he were physically restraining himself from reaching for her. "You look worse than I do," she murmured. He made a sound that was half breath, half broken laugh, and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. Marin closed the infirmary door behind her and turned to face them both with the expression of a woman who had exhausted her patience somewhere around the 3rd day and was now operating on pure professional obligation. "I will speak plainly," she said. "You share a forming bond. It is incomplete, which means the pull between you is at its most volatile. The separation is not neutral. It is actively damaging you both." Torvain's jaw hardened. "We discussed this." "You discussed it," Marin corrected. "You issued a decree. That is not the same thing." She opened her journal and set it on the table between them. "Her vitals have deteriorated every day since you sent her away. Yours have done the same. The parallel decline is textbook bond severance syndrome, and if it continues, one or both of you will not survive it." The room went very quiet. "Then sever it," Torvain said. "Break the bond before it completes." Seren flinched as if he had struck her. Marin shook her head. "It cannot be severed at this stage without killing her. Possibly both of you." Torvain closed his eyes. His hands, resting on his thighs, clenched into fists so tight the tendons stood out like cords. "Tell me about the curse," Marin said, her voice gentler now. "Everything. No more half-truths." For a long moment Seren thought he would refuse. He sat motionless, his eyes closed, his breathing controlled, and the silence stretched until it ached. Then he spoke. "The Northern Consolidation lasted 2 years," he said. 3 packs allied under a warlord named Dragon, who believed the borderlands belonged to no king. They raided villages, burned crops, took wolves as slaves and sold them to human traffickers across the eastern border. His voice was flat, methodical, the voice of a man reciting facts he had locked in a box and buried deep. I sent emissaries. 4 separate attempts at negotiation. Dragon killed 3 of them and sent the 4th back barely alive as a warning. Torvain paused. So I went to war. Seren watched the muscle in his jaw jumping, the way his knuckles had gone white. The final battle was at Greymarch, Dragon's stronghold, a fortified settlement in the mountains. 1,200 fighters behind walls. I laid siege for 3 weeks. On the night we breached the outer wall, Dragon's mate, a woman named Ilsa, tried to evacuate the non-combatants through a tunnel system beneath the settlement. He stopped. The silence that followed was heavy enough to bruise. The tunnels collapsed, Seren said quietly. She did not know how she knew. She felt it through the bond, fragments of memory bleeding through like ink through wet paper. My sappers had undermined the foundations, Torvain said. We did not know about the tunnels. We did not know there were families down there. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. 43 wolves, 15 of them were children. Seren pressed her hand over her mouth. Dragon died on the wall that night. Ilsa survived. She survived everything. He opened his eyes, and they were distant, seeing something far away and terrible. She found me afterward, standing in the ruins. She was carrying her granddaughter's body. The girl's name was Bryn. She was 6 years old. Maren sat motionless, her pen still against the page of her journal. Ilsa was a seer, Torvain continued. Old bloodline, old power. She looked at me holding the sword that had killed her son, standing above the rubble that had buried her grandchild, and she spoke the curse into my bones. Every night, the dead will find you. Every night, you will walk among them, and you will never rest until you have suffered what they suffered. Over a year of this, Maren murmured. Every night, Torvain confirmed. The black pines, the shadows, they are the dead from Greymarch, and every battle before it. And they are patient. Seren reached for his hand. He let her take it, but his fingers were cold, lifeless. Maren, Seren said, not taking her eyes from Torvain's face. You said the bond is what allows me to enter his curse space. Could the bond also be what breaks it? Maren was quiet, thinking. Seer curses feed on emotional resonance, she said slowly. Guilt, grief, shame. They do not simply punish, they amplify what is already there. If the source of the resonance is addressed, if the emotional foundation the curse is built on shifts, the structure collapses. Meaning if he stops believing he deserves it, Seren said. Torvain pulled his hand free. 43 wolves died because of my orders, he said, his voice hardening. 15 children. Bryn was 6 years old and she died in the dark, underground, afraid, because I did not think to ask whether there were tunnels beneath the walls I was destroying. He stood, putting distance between them. I do deserve it. Torvain, this conversation is over. He turned toward the door. It is not over, Seren said, rising from the bed despite Maren's sharp look of protest. You can walk out of this room, but the bond will follow you, and the curse will follow you, and I will follow you, because I am not going to watch you die for a debt you have already paid 1,000 times over. He stopped at the door, his back to her, his hand on the frame. You cannot save me, he said quietly. You keep saying that, Seren replied, and I keep not listening. He left without looking back. But he did not close the door behind him, and Seren chose to believe that meant something. Jarell was waiting for her in the corridor outside the infirmary the following evening. He leaned against the wall with his arms crossed and the expression of a man who had made a decision and was prepared to accept the consequences. He is in the tower, Jarell said. He has not eaten. He has not slept. He will not see anyone. Will he see me? Seren asked. No, Jarell said, which is why I am going to let you in without his knowledge. Seren studied the beta's face. He could exile you for this. He could, Jarell agreed calmly. But he will be alive to do it, and that is what matters to me. They walked through the fortress in silence. The corridors were empty, the household asleep. Their footsteps echoed against the stone, and Seren's heartbeat echoed louder. Every step closer to the tower pulled the ache in her chest tighter, not with pain now, but with urgency. With need. With the terrifying certainty that she was walking toward something she could not walk back from. Jorel unlocked the tower door and stepped aside. For what it is worth, he said. I have known him since we were boys. I have never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Then he was gone, his footsteps retreating down the stairwell, and Seren stood alone before the heavy door with nothing between her and the man on the other side, but oak and iron and her own thundering pulse. She pushed the door open. The room was dark. The fire had burned down to embers that cast a low orange glow across the floor. Torvain stood at the window with his back to her, his silhouette cut against the faint light from the valley below. He kept his back to her. Jarell, he said flatly. Yes, Seren confirmed. Jarell. He turned then. The sight of him stole the air from her lungs. He looked ravaged. The exhaustion had carved his face down to its sharpest angles, all shadow and bone. His skin had gone pale beneath the stubble that darkened his jaw, and his hands, braced against the windowsill behind him, were trembling. You should not be here, he said. That seems to be a recurring theme with us, Seren replied, stepping further into the room. Seren? Her name came out rough and frayed. I am trying to protect you. I know, she said. And I am telling you that I do not want to be protected. Not from this. Not from you. He shook his head, pressing his palms against his eyes. You do not understand what I am. What I have done. The things I carry. The lives I have ended. The children who died because I gave an order without asking the right questions. You deserve someone who is not drowning, Seren. Someone whole. She crossed the room and stopped in front of him, close enough to feel the heat of him, close enough to see the moisture gathering at the edges of his closed eyes. No one is whole, she said softly. I am certainly not. I spent my entire life believing I was invisible because I deserved to be. That Carden choosing someone else was just the world confirming what I already knew, that I am not the kind of person who gets chosen. Torvain's eyes opened. The raw, unguarded pain in them made her chest ache. I chose you, he said, and the words came out like they had been torn from somewhere deep inside him. That night in Ash Grove, you were standing at that fountain, and everything in me recognized you, and it terrified me because I knew I would ruin you, that the curse would find you, that the darkness in me would bleed into you, and I would destroy the only good thing that has happened to me in years. Seren took his face in her hands. His skin was warm beneath her palms, rough with stubble, and she felt him shudder at the contact. You have not destroyed me, she whispered. You gave me a place to belong when the only home I knew threw me away. You left tea by my bed every morning and pretended the quartermaster did it. You laughed at my terrible stories and thought I did not notice. Her thumbs traced the shadows beneath his eyes. You are not darkness, Torvain. You are just a man who has been carrying too much for too long and forgot that he is allowed to set it down. He broke. The sound he made was quiet and devastating, and his forehead dropped to hers. His hands came up to cover hers where they held his face, and his fingers shook against her knuckles. I cannot lose you, he said, barely audible. The curse, the dead, the forest. I can endure all of it. But I cannot endure you being taken from me. Then stop sending me away, Seren said, and let me stay. She kissed him. Soft at first, tentative, giving him room to pull back. He answered immediately, his hands sliding into her hair, and he kissed her with the desperate urgency of a man who had been holding his breath for months and was finally allowed to breathe. She pulled him closer and he came willingly, his arms wrapping around her, lifting her, carrying her to the bed. The kisses deepened, turned urgent, turned hungry. His fingers tangled in her hair, her palms pressed against his chest. Every touch was a conversation they had been having in silence for weeks, finally spoken aloud. The world narrowed to the two of them, breath and heartbeat and warmth, a connection that went deeper than anything she had ever known. Seren whispered his name, and he answered with hers. And when the wave finally broke over them both, he pressed his mouth to the curve of her throat and bit down. The mating bond ignited like a struck match. She felt it flood through her, golden and fierce and absolute, connecting her to him at a level so deep it rewrote something fundamental in her chest. She bit him back, her teeth finding the juncture of his neck and shoulder, and felt a low sound vibrate through her bones. The bond sealed. Complete. Permanent. They held each other afterward, tangled together so thoroughly that she could not tell where she ended and he began. Torvain pulled her against his chest, his arms locked around her as if the world might try to take her, and he intended to make that impossible. She felt his breathing slow, felt the tension drain from his body, felt him surrender to sleep with a completeness she had never witnessed, as if the bond had finally given him permission to stop fighting. Seren closed her eyes, joy blooming warm and radiant in her chest, and let sleep take her under. She woke on frozen ground. The cold was absolute. Seren lay on her back on black ice, staring up at a sky the color of ash. The pines towered above her, closer than they had ever been, their branches woven so tightly overhead that they formed a ceiling, a cage. She sat up and felt the bond pulsing in her chest, warm and golden even here, even in this place that was designed to devour warmth. It was a lifeline. She held onto it and stood. The cursed landscape stretched in every direction, identical and featureless. But Seren did not need to see him. She could feel him. The bond pulled her forward, guiding her through the trees with the certainty of a compass needle finding north. She found him at the lake. The frozen surface stretched out into the gray, and Torvain stood at its edge, motionless. The shadow figures surrounded him, dozens of them, more than she had ever seen. They pressed close, their flickering forms dense and almost solid, their eyeless faces turned toward the man at the center with an attention that was patient and absolute. And in front of them all, a child, a girl, small and slight, maybe 6 years old, standing on the ice in a white dress that was stained with dark earth. Her eyes were open and empty. Her hands were clasped in front of her, and she looked up at Torvain with an expression that held no malice, only a sorrow so vast it seemed impossible for a child's face to contain. "Bryn," Seren whispered. Torvain was on his knees, his head bowed, his hands flat on the ice. The posture of a man who had stopped fighting, not because he was brave, but because he had decided he deserved to lose. Seren could feel it through the bond, the guilt, massive and crushing, a black ocean of it that had been filling him for more than a year, rising a little higher every night until it lapped at the edges of everything he was. He believed this was justice. He believed this place was where he belonged. "Torvain," Seren said, dropping to her knees beside him. "Look at me." The shadows pressed closer. He remained motionless. "Look at me," she said again, taking his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. The bond flared at the contact, pushing back the cold, and for a moment, his gaze focused. "They will not stop," he said. "They never stop." "Because you will not let them," Seren said. "You hold them here. Your guilt holds them here. They cannot rest because you will not let yourself rest. The child Bryn tilted her head. Around them, the shadows murmured, a chorus of voices that overlapped and tangled into something that sounded like accusation, but might also have been grief. You gave the order, the child said in a voice that was not hers. It was his own voice, reflected back at him through the curse, feeding him the poison he already believed. You did not ask about the tunnels. You did not think about who might be underground. A better king would have known. Stop, Seren said, her voice breaking. She turned to the ghost, to the echo, to whatever this shadow was that wore a dead girl's face. He has heard this every night for over a year. It has not brought you back. It has not brought any of you back. The shadows stilled. Seren turned back to Torvain, her hands still on his face, tears freezing on her cheeks. What happened at Greymarch was a tragedy, she said, and the words came out fierce and raw. It was a war you did not start against a man who killed your emissaries and sold your people into slavery. You tried to end it with the least bloodshed possible, and it was not enough. Because war is never enough, because there is no version of war where no one innocent gets hurt. That is not your failure. That is the failure of every impossible choice forced on you by a man who chose violence over peace. Torvain's eyes were fixed on hers, and she could feel him through the bond, feel the black ocean of guilt churning, feel the part of him that wanted to believe her warring with the part that had been drowning for so long it had forgotten what air tasted like. Bryn died in the dark, Seren continued, her voice shaking. And that is horrifying, and you are allowed to grieve that for the rest of your life. But you are not allowed to die for it. Because dying here, in this place, alone, does not honor her memory. It does not save her. It just means the curse wins, and Ilsa's grief becomes your grave, and everyone who needs you, Jarell, your kingdom, me, everyone loses you to a debt that was never yours alone to carry. She was crying now, the tears hot against her frozen skin. I know what it feels like to believe you deserve the worst thing that happened to you, she whispered. I spent 23 years thinking my parents left me because I was not worth keeping. And I carried that everywhere, into every room, every relationship, every quiet moment alone. I made it my home because the pain was familiar and familiar felt safe. She pressed her forehead to his. But it was a lie, Torvain. It was always a lie. I did not deserve to be abandoned. And you do not deserve this. For a long, suspended moment, nothing moved. The shadows waited. The ice waited. The entire cursed landscape held its breath. Then Torvain's hands came up and covered hers. I am sorry, he said, and the words were not for Seren. He looked past her, at the ghost of Bryn, at the faceless dead arrayed behind her. I am sorry I could not save you. I am sorry I did not ask the right questions. I will carry that for the rest of my life. His voice steadied. But I cannot stay here anymore. I cannot keep dying for you. It will not bring you home. The ghost of Bryn looked at him. For one heartbeat, her expression changed. The borrowed sorrow fell away, and beneath it was something small and simple and impossibly tender. She closed her eyes. The shadows dissolved. One by one, like frost in sunlight, they thinned and faded and were gone. The pines cracked and splintered, light breaking through the canopy for the first time, warm and golden and real. The ice beneath their knees fractured, and through the cracks, Seren saw not dark water, but earth, rich and alive. Torvain fell forward into her arms, and she caught him, held him, pressed her face into his hair and held on while more than a year of grief and guilt and sleepless howling nights finally broke open and poured out of him. He shook against her. He wept. And she held him through all of it, the bond burning warm and golden between them, a light the curse could no longer touch, I have you, she whispered. I have you. I am here. They woke tangled together in his bed, in the warm dark of the tower room, the fire crackling low. Torvain's face was wet. So was hers. He looked at her with eyes that were clear for the first time since she had known him, truly clear, and pulled her close. Thank you, he said into her hair. Thank you. Seren held him tighter and said nothing, because nothing needed to be said. The curse did not vanish like smoke. Torvain still dreamed of Greymarch. He still woke some nights with his fists clenched and his breathing ragged, the echoes of a collapsing tunnel ringing in his ears. But Seren was there, every time, and her voice in the dark was enough to pull him back. The cursed place did not return. Marin documented the recovery with clinical precision and quiet satisfaction. Jarell said nothing, but Seren caught him smiling once when he thought no one was looking, a small private expression that vanished the moment he noticed her watching. The court had opinions. An outsider from Ashgrove, a woman with no rank, no bloodline, no family name, bonded to the Alpha King of the Black Veil Dominion. The whispers were constant. Seren felt them like needles at the back of her neck, in the council hall, in the corridors, in the careful, appraising looks of nobles who had expected someone else. But Torvain's hand found hers at every gathering. His voice carried her name with a weight that left no room for doubt. And when a visiting dignitary made the mistake of referring to her as the herbalist in Torvain's presence, the temperature in the room dropped so sharply that the man corrected himself mid-sentence and did not make the error again. They will adjust, Torvain told her one evening, pulling her against his chest in the quiet of their chambers. And if they do not, they can take it up with their king. And what will their king do? Seren asked, tilting her head to look at him. Whatever his Luna tells him to, he said, and the corner of his mouth lifted. Months later, on a pale winter morning, Seren woke slowly in the tower room to find the bed warm and the man beside her still sleeping. His breathing was deep and even, his face relaxed, the hard lines of command and grief softened into something almost boyish. One arm was draped across her waist, the other was tucked beneath his pillow. He looked like a man who had finally stopped running from something. Seren watched him in the gray light and felt the bond hum quietly in her chest, steady and golden and sure. She did not need a ring. She had never needed a ring. What she had was better. What she had was a man who had walked through fire and frozen forests and the weight of his own guilt, and had come out the other side holding her hand. She settled back against his shoulder. His arm tightened around her, reflexive even in sleep. Outside, the first snow of the season drifted past the tower window, soft and silent and clean. They slept.